Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regularly scheduled Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Wiener, who is the vice chair. And my left is Supervisor Aaron Peskin. Our clerk is the lovely, talented Andrea Osbury. And I also would like to recognize Leo Diacis and Phil Jackson from SFGov TV, who are helping us by broadcasting this meeting. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements before us?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the June 21st, 2016 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated. All
right. Madam Clerk, can you call items 1 and 2 together?
Yes. Item number 1 is a resolution authorizing the Municipal Transportation Agency to execute a grant application for affordable housing sustainable communities program at 480 Eddy Street. And item number 2 is a resolution authorizing the Municipal Transportation Agency to execute a grant application for affordable housing and sustainable communities program at 455 Fell Street project.
Thank you. So, colleagues, the sponsor of this item, items 1 and 2, they've informed me that there are additional documents and requirements needed in order to finalize these resolutions and applications, and that they have requested a continuance to the June 27th land use meeting. And before we take public comment, there's staff from the Mayor's Office of Housing that's here. Is there anything that they'd like to add? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much. Seeing that there's no other comments, let's go ahead and take public comment on this item. To the members of the audience, we are taking public comment on items 1 and 2. You'll have you'll have 2 minutes up here at the podium. Please come up if you're interested in speaking. Okay. Seeing none, public comment is closed. Thank you very much. Colleagues, can I have a motion to continue this item to our June 27th meeting? Motion made by Supervisor Peskin, and without objection, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you call item 3?
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the Transportation Code to consolidate and clarify fare evasion and passenger conduct regulations. All
right. So, colleagues, my office also has received a request from the sponsor of this item, which is Supervisor Marr, that we continue this item to our next meeting on June 20th. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on item number 3? Please come up. Anyone that would like to speak on item 3? All right. Public comment is closed at this time. Thank you. Colleagues, can I have a motion to continue this item to June 20th? Thank you. Motion made by Supervisor Wiener. Without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Could you please call, Madam Clerk, items 4 and 5?
Yes. Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to create affordable housing bonus programs. And item number 5 is an ordinance amending the general plan in association with legislation creating the affordable housing bonus program.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Tang will be joining us shortly. Perhaps we could start with the Planning Department and their presentation until Supervisor Tang gets here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. John Ram with the Planning Department. I will just kick off this item briefly and then introduce my colleagues who will give most of the presentation. It is no secret to any of us that affordable housing is probably the issue of our time, and this is an issue that is that is a crisis not only here in San Francisco but in many cities across the country, especially cities, large, dense, urban, walkable cities that are becoming increasingly attractive to a larger percentage of the population. We were charged when we developed this program with grappling with the state density bonus law and developing a local program to implement that law, which the law does require us to do, or in lieu of that, developers do have the option of using the state law as it's currently written. We worked with affordable housing developers and the Mayor's Office of Housing to make the entitlement of 100% affordable housing easier, to enable the city to use affordable housing dollars easier. Obviously, securing land for affordable housing is also a major obstacle, and land costs are a significant part of the costs related to housing construction. So when we do secure land for affordable housing, this program would certainly allow the development of that housing to be a little bit easier. We are working hard to support affordable housing programs, and we are looking forward to continuing working on that with MOHCD and the board. The department is honored to lead this work. We are, whether this goes forward as just the affordable housing program or the larger mixed-use program, we believe strongly in the importance of this program, that it will lead to the development of significantly larger numbers of affordable units than we are seeing today. I just want to take a minute to thank the staff who have worked on this. Kirsten Dissinger from my department, who led the effort, Menica Mohan and Paolo Ikuzoe, who are here today. Other city departments, particularly Sophie Hayward at the Mayor's Office of Housing, obviously Supervisor Tang and her staff, Jeff Buckley from the Mayor's Office, as well as Michael Lee and Corey Teague at the Planning Department. It's an important effort. We are grateful for your moving ahead with it, and we're happy to present and make and answer any questions today. I understand Supervisor Tang would probably like to make a few comments, but after her comments, Gil Kelly and my staff will make the bulk of the presentation. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Supervisor Tang, who is the author of this legislation, to the Land Use Committee. Supervisor Tang, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you so much to the planning staff for working so tirelessly on this particular program. I'm not going to go too much into the history of the development of this legislation, except to say that really we had worked for about 2 years, planning staff had worked with about 2 years with technical consultants to figure out what is the best way that we can encourage more affordable housing here in San Francisco, while also ensuring that we're not being so fluid with the restrictions, such as under the state density bonus law. And I know that there have been some concerns about the lack of community outreach on this, but I would say that for this particular program, I have never seen the planning department staff work so hard to go out to practically every single supervisorial district, some more than once, to discuss this program. And so through those outreach meetings, we have really fine-tuned and continue to fine-tune what it is that we'd like to see under the Affordable Housing Bonus Program. And so with that said, I think that we have heard many of you loud and clear in terms of your concerns. I think there will be areas where we will disagree. But in terms of my goals, really first and foremost as to why I was even involved with this in the first place, is that I would really like us to see better tools for us to support middle-income families here in San Francisco, which is something that we certainly do not do. I also want to clarify, just given some of the comments that I've heard from various community members, is just to make sure that there is an understanding that we have both a mixed income program, a market rate program supported by market rate developers, as well as a 100% affordable program, which I understand that Supervisor Peskin has his version of that he introduced last week as well. And so given the round of community outreach meetings that we have all held, there are a couple of amendments that I will be making today. And I want to clarify that many of these amendments are actually to our mixed income program. And so I have a couple of copies here, just a high-level summary of some of those amendments, and I'll share those with our committee members. Again, this is for the mixed income program. I will be amending the legislation to prohibit the demolition of existing residential units. That includes rent-controlled units. This is something that Supervisor London Breed had announced several months ago, and I am just simply putting that into the actual legislation today. Secondly, we are actually going to be requiring a conditional use authorization process for the mixed income program. We have heard loud and clear that our community members want a voice when it comes to the approval process, and so we are going to require a CU for these mixed income projects. Thirdly, we're going to direct the city to explore establishing a small business relocation fee and first right of refusal concept, as well as other small business preservation tools. Certainly, we do not want to see our small businesses lost in this process. We want to support them. We want them to come back. There are other things that we are also doing. For example, we would love to explore the idea of maintaining the same square footage so that it's not encouraging formula retail from coming in on the ground floor. But there are some things that we actually need a little bit more time on to sort out legally, and so we are directing the city to explore many of those things here. Fourth, we are requiring that the early notification to commercial tenants, which we already had in the legislation, be no less than 18 months and be sent to both the tenant and the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. And this will help us figure out with the small business how it is that we can better support them if there is a project that impacts their building. And fifth, to the mixed income program, we are including in our findings section a reference to the existing tools and support available to small business tenants in case of displacement. So as I've said before, I think that really the bulk of our work should be focused on how it is that we can preserve our small businesses in these buildings while, again, trying to achieve more affordable housing in our neighborhoods. And then to the 100% affordable program, a couple of amendments that I would like to make today. Because many of, I think, the concepts that were in Supervisor Peskin's legislation are actually already in ours, but there are two major things that we want to point out. One is that we do want to, again, prohibit the demolition of existing residential units. So that's a concept we're applying to both programs. And also projects, I just wanted to highlight for the committee that projects under the 100% program are already prohibited on parcels that are designated RH1 and RH2. So those are the changes that I would like to make. And at this time, then, I will throw it back to the planning department staff. I think that they'll be able to explain some of the rationale behind some of the changes that we're making today. So I think we have Gil Kelly up. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, supervisors. Again, Gil Kelly, Director of...
I'm sorry, Gil, before you get started, I'm sorry. Supervisor Peskin was on the roster. I just want to give him an opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be brief, and we'll hold a bunch of my comments for later in the meeting. But I also wanted to acknowledge the work of Supervisor Tang, her staff, as well as the Planning Department and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, as well as the many hundreds of individuals who have been involved in workshops and who have contacted all of our offices about this really, quite frankly, very controversial, very important piece of legislation that I hope we all get right. I just wanted to say, as a preliminary comment, there are two items before us. One is Supervisor Tang's piece of legislation. The second is a general plan amendment. I have, together with Supervisor Marr, introduced a separate piece of legislation that is not technically in front of this committee yet, although later on in this hearing I will duplicate Supervisor Tang's legislation and use that as a vehicle to amend in Supervisor Marr and my density done right proposal. But I want to take a step back and say that as an overarching matter, the general plan amendment that is before this body, I think, has been done in a way that is too broad and needs to be more narrowly tailored. And I believe that planning has the ability to tailor it more narrowly rather than that set of asterisks that, to my mind, is not the right way of going about it. So I will, later on in the meeting, after public comment, suggest that we forward the general plan amendment to the full board for action. And let me just say at the outset that because of the way the law works, general plan amendments go into effect 90 days after this body receives a general plan amendment from the planning department after action by the commission. If we do not act in that 90 days, it, as a matter of law, is deemed to be approved. So we need to take action prior to July 6th. But that action wherein I believe we need to turn down the general plan amendment as currently written should in no way be construed as a desire not to move forward with some type of AHDP legislation out of this body, but I think it needs to be more narrowly crafted. So I will be suggesting later on in the meeting that we forward the general plan amendment to the full board with a recommendation not to pass it as this body deliberates Supervisor Tang's legislation with the amendments that she has proposed, which I appreciate, as well as the duplicated file, which will reflect Supervisor Marr and my density done right legislation that we introduced last week.
Thank you very much. All right, Gil, we're ready for you.
Great. Again, good afternoon, supervisors. Gil Kelly, Director of Citywide Planning in the Planning Department. I have a presentation which is relatively high level and brief, so I think it's best use of your time if I keep it that way and that we respond to your particular questions subsequent to the presentation. So, just so you know sort of what's in this presentation and what's in front of you again today, it's been summarized, but I wanted to begin by stepping back just a little bit briefly to frame what this is all about, and then to talk about the two components of the program and the suggestion that that was both made by the Planning Commission, frankly, and by the sponsoring supervisor, that we continue to refine some parts of the mixed income program in particular, and then describe the proposed actions for you today. Again, so that will zero in primarily on the 100% affordable piece. Just wanted to step back and say that there are some key facts that we all need to be aware of, because it's very easy to get into the details of this debate over program details, and just to assert that right now about 43% of San Francisco's households pay more than 30% of their income for housing. This is an astounding figure, actually. And in fact, something on the order of 20 or 22% pay more than 50% of their income on housing. So that's an enormous number. And what's also occurring is that as San Francisco grows and adds population, there's an enormous churn of the population underneath that. So whereas in the last few years we've added about 10,000 people per year to San Francisco, in at least a couple of the recent years, as many as 70,000 people have moved in, but 60,000 have left. And of those people leaving, the income bias there tends to be higher income individuals moving into San Francisco and lower income earners and families moving out. And so those are just two key realities that have some big drivers behind them. And the second piece on this page is really to sort of crystallize what those big moving pieces are, because the debate is actually much bigger than we're having even here today. First of all, we are seeing a reversal in the last decade of many, many decades of move of families to the suburbs. That trend has been reversing now and looks to continue over the next 4 to 5 decades. So just that pressure of people moving to the core, which are increasingly attractive for a number of household types, is driving prices and rents up. And displacement comes with that for the lower income individuals living in the core of the city. Also, it's true that whereas the high technology sector is driving a lot of the new employment in San Francisco and in the Bay Area as a whole, those workers tend to have higher incomes and much more choice in the market about where to locate than existing residents. And so that's an additional pressure, just aside from the pure growth that's being put on our local market in San Francisco. It's also true that the Bay Area as a whole, and San Francisco too, has been underproducing new housing relative to the increase in the number of jobs. And it's important to note that that is a Bay Area-wide phenomenon. We've added in the Bay Area about 600,000 jobs since post-recession, so since 2010, and we've added only about 55,000 housing units. So if you figure 2 people per household, we should have added something on the order of 300,000 households. So we're vastly underproducing as a region, and that's been true in the city as well. The other fact that is really, I would say, driving a lot of the anxiety in San Francisco in particular is the erosion of rent control, the rent control program and the rent control stock. It's important to know that 46% of our entire housing supply in San Francisco falls under rent control, but with vacancy decontrol in particular, you're seeing rents rise enormously as tenants move, and whether of their own volition or not. And we're seeing increased eviction pressure and owner move-ins and so forth. All of that is really eroding the existing housing stock in the rental controlled supply with an accelerated pace over past years. And then there are some other deductions to the housing supply. These tend to be fairly minor in numbers. The short-term rentals, absentee owners that are holding units vacant and so forth, those are relatively small, but all those things combined are placing enormous pressure on the affordable housing supply. And again, going back to that top number, about 43% of all San Francisco households are paying more than the sort of accepted industry standard, if you will, in terms of their income for rent. So here's how it plays out in San Francisco. In the case of, we're looking here at a one-bedroom unit on sort of the left side and a two-bedroom unit on the right side. These are rents. So the average rent now in San Francisco, and I think these are from earlier this year, from January, so they're probably higher now, are about $3,500 for a one-bedroom unit. And you can see below in the left column that what households can actually afford. And you can see all the way up through middle-income families, there's quite a gap there between what they can afford at that 30% level of income in terms of what the market rate of rental units is. And if you look in the next column at the two-bedroom units, again, an enormous gap, $2,800 at the upper end, the middle income, versus $4,600 in the actual market rents that are being charged. So what are we doing about all this? Outside of this particular program, before we get to that, we're doing some things both with producing new housing and with stabilizing the existing stock. You all know all of this, but it's important to just remember that what we're talking about today is one slice of a bigger pie. So we have inclusionary requirements, including the recent ballot measure. So private development is paying for some share of new affordable units. We have underway a number of 100% affordable units in the pipeline. We have projects that are supported by tax increment financing through OCII, but those are limited in number and are finite because redevelopment authority has ended. So we're sort of playing out the last of those. I would go back and mention that the 100% affordable projects are highly dependent on tax credits. So that is leveraging local dollars and then largely federal tax credits to make those feasible. There's an argument that increasing the regional supply of market rate housing will take some pressure off the affordable market. There's still a long way to catch up on a regional basis, so this is something that we can't put too many eggs in that particular basket, but it's important to acknowledge. And then finally, the state has had on the books for several decades now the density bonus provision, which on advice of our city attorney it applies clearly to San Francisco, and for which this proposal that you'll be seeing in a moment is a response to make it more locally acceptable and workable. On the existing supply, we're not doing such a good job, frankly. As I said, the rent control has been our biggest program, but that's eroding relatively quickly. And again, that probably mostly serves the sort of moderate to middle spectrum and not so much the low and very low. We are, through the Mission District process, for example, increasing the suite of tenant protections. But again, those go to sort of stave off evictions and to try to stabilize occupants in their units. It doesn't literally add to the supply. And then there's a modest amount of acquisition of existing units going on through the community land trust model. And again, that's a very small piece of the activity at the moment, but one that I think is important for us to look forward to. So here's how these kind of play out, these programs, at least some of these in production numbers. So again, this is not the preservation side, this is the new unit side, and how those play out in terms of incomes. So we have an existing permanently affordable base of about close to 40,000 units in the city. You'll hear a little bit later from the Mayor's Office of Housing, and they have between themselves and the OCII about 8,000, a little more. I think that number's actually increased a little bit from earlier in the year in the pipeline over the next 10 years. So 48,000 or 49,000 combining those two. This program would add over a longer period of time, because it's dependent on individual transactions and individual developers, about 5,000 total affordable units. They straddle a couple of income categories there at the top, because this applies to both ownership and for rent units, just as our inclusionary does, so it mirrors those income levels. But about 5,000 we predict based on sort of the soft sites that would take advantage of and this again is the whole program, the mixed as well as the 100%. So you kind of see the total numbers there. If we're successful with these programs, probably in the neighborhood of 50, 52, 53,000 units over the next 10 to 20 years. So even that is still just a dent in the affordable housing supply need. Supervisor Peskin mentioned the general plan amendment. This amendment would authorize subsequent planning code amendments by making it clear that there's a policy directive to do so. Again, it is general. Simply, this is the meat of it, saying that it's a policy of the city to encourage greater levels of affordability on site, and to do so, the city may adopt affordable housing policies to essentially permit height increases and building mass increases. Those would have to be prescribed in the details of the planning code. So the goals of this particular program are to create more housing in general, more affordable housing in particular, as I said, up to 5,000 units. And it is one of the very few programs that we have that can produce some amount of middle income housing, along with low and moderate income housing. So very quickly, just so the audience can follow as well, we're talking about sort of three slices of this program altogether. One is on the left, the state density bonus provision for providing, depending on rental ownership and so forth, between 13 and 20% affordable, for which they get a 35% density bonus and other incentives as they can determine are needed. The local program that we're talking about for mixed income projects would require 30% affordable and would offer 2 stories of height increase and relief from the density controls that are based on the lot area. And then finally, the 100% would actually allow 3 stories. And again, that's, I think, the focus of today's conversation primarily. That produces 100% affordable housing. So here again is a little bit of that detail, what's allowed under each of the 2 local options. This is an image, one of many that we showed in the public discussions with neighborhoods and districts. Here's a typical sort of commercial corridor with a height limit of, I think, of 45 feet in this case. That's what would be allowed, that corner building there under existing zoning. That's what would be allowed if it provided a full 30% of affordable units. And again, the 100% affordable would actually allow 3 stories, and their density would be controlled by the building envelope, by the form, in other words. And again, it would not apply in the RH1 nor RH2 districts. The Planning Commission considered all of this, did not vote as a whole to take action on the program details, although they did vote on the general plan amendment to approve that, and that's before you. They made no modifications to the staff proposal on that. In terms of the 100% affordable program, they also felt no modifications were needed from the staff proposal on that. And then finally, with the mixed income program, as Supervisor Tang referred to, there were a number of recommendations that the Planning Commission made, and they voted on these individually as opposed to voting on the whole of the package, knowing that that would be subject to great debate amongst yourselves. So here, ones that were referred to earlier, which would become part of the board's deliberation. This would be again in the mixed income housing. So parcels with residential units, whether those are rent controlled or not, would not be eligible. Projects would require a conditional use permit, And there are additional measures to preserve small business and neighborhood commercial corridors that are detailed out, and staff can answer the details on that if you like. There were a series of other recommendations that the Planning Commission made, which they believed and the legislation sponsors believe will take some additional work to study and to refine. And those are the geography of the local housing program, establishing a small business relocation fee, perhaps, and then whether or not to pursue sort of individual neighborhood level adjustments to the area median income as criteria. We say all of this knowing that the conditions around us are changing in terms of policy and legislation. The pending, I think not yet certified election on the recent inclusionary legislation at the ballot. The Controller's Office is doing a study regarding that legislation, which will look at the feasibility of projects with those inclusionary income levels, and that report and study we feel we've heard will be ready in late July or early August. And then there are requests for changes from the board, from board members anyway, and from members of the community as well as the Small Business Commission, I believe. So that's kind of the overview of where we are. The proposed actions in front of you today are the general plan amendment to which Supervisor Peskin alluded. And again, this is the principal wording of the principal section there, and there are some details to it, some asterisks. And then the 100% affordable housing program is what we understand the sponsoring supervisors would like to move forward with. And again, the critical piece there is these would be 100% affordable units that would be eligible for up to 3 stories above the existing height regulations, and their density, that is to say their number of units, would be controlled by the form of the building as opposed to a lot per square foot of land area ratio. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sophie Hayward, who's going to talk a little bit about how the 100% affordable piece of this plays into their current work program and projects that they have. Sophie?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm Sophie Hayward from the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. And as we know, and I can just reiterate what Mr. Kelly has already stressed, we're in a housing crisis, and at MoCD we continue to work to find creative solutions to bring units online and faster. So that means we're chasing every dollar that we can leverage. The first 2 items on your agenda today were related to our efforts to secure cap and trade funds to produce affordable housing. And we also want to, like anybody else, drive down the very high cost to develop housing. And for us, that means maximizing opportunities as we acquire sites. Driving down the per unit development cost will help us spread our dollars further. So the proposal to create a density bonus for the 100% affordable units is an opportunity that will allow us to maximize development potential on appropriate sites quickly, efficiently, and in a manner that respects the existing fabric of our communities. So the first slide, this is an illustration of the proposed project on Shotwell at 1294 Shotwell Street. If a local bonus program is available, it could streamline the approvals process for sites such as Shotwell. Under the current zoning, which is 65X NCT, the site can accommodate a 6-story building, and with the proposed local bonus program, the site could accommodate an additional 3 stories and 33 more affordable housing units for a total of 96 affordable units, and in this case, they're for seniors. Without the local bonus program, the project will have to pursue either a rezoning, which, as we all know, can be a lengthy process, or utilize the state density bonus program, which does not carry the same sort of San Francisco-specific parameters that have been proposed by Supervisors Tang and the Mayor, and frankly by Supervisors Peskin and Marr in their legislation as well. In the second slide, similarly, the publicly zoned site at 2070 Folsom Street would benefit from the streamlined process to add density to this site. The surrounding area, this site is zoned P for public, but the surrounding area is a 50x height and bulk district. Our plan is to develop the site with a maximum of 85 feet in height, providing 9 stories and 134 100% affordable housing units. Without a local program, the site will have to pursue a rezoning through a legislative amendment and then proceed with its entitlements. With a local bonus program for 100% affordable units, the entitlement timeline would be shorter, but at the same time, the process would provide added certainty and predictability to neighborhood stakeholders. MoCD is supportive and enthusiastic about a 100% affordable density bonus program that incorporates the best practices for our projects. By first activating the ground floor of 100% affordable buildings with neighborhood and community serving uses, as we have always done. Those uses include nonprofit space, clinics, and neighborhood serving retail. We also are very supportive of efforts to assure that no residential units will be displaced by implementing the program on sites that do not contain existing rent-controlled units or residential uses, and by restricting its implementation to sites that are more dense than RH2. So I think I should say that more clearly as not allowing the program on sites that are in RH1 and RH2 districts. And then also building on the message and the momentum started earlier this year when the board unanimously passed legislation exempting 100% affordable projects from the requirement to seek conditional use authorization. So we thank Supervisor Tang and the mayor for their work in crafting a program that addresses our portfolio. We look forward to working with all of you to come to agreement on a program that advances the goals that I know we all share, which is to produce more affordable housing faster. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is that it for the staff presentations? Okay. Supervisor Tang, is there any remarks that you'd like to give before we go into public comment?
I would just say that I will actually reserve more of my comments for after public comment. I am interested in hearing what additional concerns are raised by our community members. So actually, I'll save it for after public comment.
All right, thank you. So we'll go to public comment at this time. I've got a stack of public comment cards here. First is Marla Knight, followed by Deepa Varma, Teresa something with an F, Kathy Lipscomb, Lorraine Petty, and George Wooding. Would you all start to queue up and get ready to speak here at the podium? You'll have 2 minutes. You'll hear a soft chime indicating that you'll have 30 seconds remaining in your time. Please, why don't you just come up since you're first?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Marla Knight of North Beach Tenants Committee, and we urge you to vote down the general plan amendment and support Supervisors Peskin and Mars density done right, which includes and ensures good site selection, no displacement of residential or commercial tenants, and very importantly, and we see this in North Beach on other things that have been instituted, other legislation. Very importantly, this legislation would maintain public process requirements. We in the committee are very happy, of course, about the 100% affordable housing, but we feel that this legislation needs to be refined. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. Katie.
Thank you, supervisors in the planning department. I'm Deepa Varma from the San Francisco Tenants Union, and frankly, I'm really surprised that we're here again. We've been here multiple times. There have been multiple hearings, multiple meetings. Hundreds of people have come out to speak about a mixed income, as you call it now, mixed income program, or as we call it, a displacement plan, a density plan that was not discussed broadly across the community and decided upon in a way that where there was clarity and where there was an opportunity to participate. This is the first we heard about this was today, this afternoon. What we believed we were here for, the reason that there's only a dozen or so of us instead of 100 of us today, is because what we thought we were talking about was a 100% affordable plan. There's been a group of people working on a 100% affordable plan, as you know, with Supervisors Peskin and Marr, and I understand the mayor liked that idea and Supervisor Tang liked that idea, and I like the fact that everyone likes this idea and we're working on something together. And we thought that today we were going to come together to talk about how these two plans could work together and we could actually pass something that builds real affordable housing in this city. But instead, we have this out of nowhere, this new idea, and it's totally confusing, and we don't know what's going on. And we haven't heard a single thing about what the sites are. Are we upzoning the entire city? I don't understand. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board for this mixed income piece. And in the meantime, we need to think about tenants, we need to think about merchants, we need to think about neighborhoods, and you need to include us.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Lipscomb, and I'm a member of Senior and Disability Action. I'm on the board. There was a huge outcry, as you remember, that united both the east and west parts of the city when the general plan, or the HBD, surfaced last year. Both tenants, homeowners, as well as small businesses got together to push it back. Supervisors Peskin and Marr, with lots of community input, subsequently came forward with a density done right alternative that must survive now. With gentrification and displacement still galloping forward in large parts of the city, it is urgent that the 100% affordable element become a reality. Real affordability must be connected to neighborhood median income. Those in the Tenants Union and elsewhere who have looked at the PC's, Planning Commission's available 241 sites found that too many actually had apartment buildings and businesses on them. So sites must be selected that don't demolish existing housing and neighborhood retail. The Planning Commission approval of projects and community input and conditional use must be the democratic foundation of any density bonus program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorraine Petty. I'm a lifelong voter. I'm in District 5. But I'm also a member of San Francisco's senior population. We're more than 180,000 strong, sometimes not so strong. We need to keep the rent-controlled units that we have and the reasonably priced housing that we have. We need to keep that, and if we get new affordable housing, we need it to be able to accommodate our fixed incomes. I'm here to speak in favor of the principles in Supervisors Peskin and Marr proposal, 100% affordable housing. I speak in opposition to the density program originally developed by the planning staff and the general plan amendment that reflects it. That plan would cover 30,000 sites. It would disrupt neighborhoods, allow demolition and displacement, create market housing, and too little affordable housing. The Peskin-Marr resolution was crafted to encompass all the publicly expressed needs of the neighbors, the neighborhood groups, the tenant groups, small business groups, and affordable housing groups, plus the recommendations of the planning commissioners at that February 25th full meeting of the Planning Commission. The consensus was clear, 100% affordable housing based on neighborhood income standards with the planning commissioners and the neighborhood approval paramount, using the conditional use process. No demolition, no displacement, limit the density bonus sites to verified soft sites. That would be abandoned or little use properties. Collectively, I call these the neighborhood principles to build by.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Flandrick from North Beach, also representing Senior and Disability Action. Again, no displacement, no demolition. I also support the density done right. And again, it's thinking of what the incomes our seniors had in 2010 when a number of elder agencies worked together to create the senior tsunami, the silver tsunami it was called. And that's when we saw incomes in my district of $33,000 as the median income. And for seniors, that income has not risen. There are, yes, the newcomers that have much, much higher incomes, which skews everything. However, the reality is as Lorraine so wonderfully said, when 20% of the population here make less than $14,000 a year, we need to make sure we have housing for them. Again, 81% of all of the evictions have been seniors or people with disabilities. So again, it's thinking very carefully, very slowly about what is the best for the neighborhoods and our input. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is George Wooding. I'm president of the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. And I, too, wanted to reiterate what was said earlier regarding we have not seen any of the amendments. And some of us came here for a little bit different hearing. A broad consensus from a coalition of tenants, neighborhoods, small businesses, and affordable housing organizations have helped to work together to create density done right. The major tenets are to target 100% affordable housing proposals, ensure the affordable units are affordable up to a neighborhood median income, the area where they are located, select sites that are not demolished among existing housing, conditional use, do not displace neighborhood serving retail, and mitigate impacts, if any, on PDR employment or nonprofit services that may be on such sites, and provide Planning Commission approval. This is conditional use. But we do want to thank you for the changes and the effort of the Planning Commission, and we welcome working with you. And we want to thank you for we think we're headed to a much better piece of legislation. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wooding. I have a couple more speaker cards, so please come on up. Marla Knight, Deepa Varma, Teresa Flannery, okay. Kathy Lipscomb already spoke. Loren Petty, George Wooding, you spoke. Henry Karnilowicz, John Winston, Catherine Howard, Tony Robles, Jim Lazarus, and Christy Wang. Please come on up.
Madam Chairman, can I speak for Henry Karnilowicz? I just spoke to him. He's on the way. He was at another location, and he said that he would be here in perhaps 20 minutes.
All right, please proceed.
Well, actually, I just wanted to let you know that he's on his way.
Okay, that's fine. He can speak when he comes. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Catherine Howard, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, and speak. First, I suggest you forward the general plan amendments with a negative recommendation for the full Board of Supervisors to vote down. Secondly, I support the Pescadmore Density Done Right 100% affordable housing legislation. This ensures that the units are affordable up to a neighborhood median income. It also protects existing housing, does not displace neighborhood-serving businesses, and provides Planning Commission approval. These key requirements are important. We are building more than housing, we are building communities, and the type of housing and its impact on the surrounding community are issues that deserve public input. Lastly, in addition, I appreciate Supervisor Tang's efforts to introduce amendments to her own legislation. However, these amendments are new to us, and they need to be reviewed in the context of the full legislation before the public can understand their impact and know if the resultant legislation would be beneficial to the community. Until this has been done, I recommend that legislation and amendments not be approved today, and that, for now, every effort be placed to pass only the Peskin-Moore 100% affordable housing legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And I'm going to call up a few more comment cards. Austin Hunter, Andy Thornley, Corey Smith, Pat Valentino, Tim Colin, Fernando Marti.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Robles with Senior and Disability Action. Just to reiterate what has been said earlier, it's very important for the people that we serve, seniors and people with disabilities, and the overall community. No displacement, no demolition, no displacement of existing tenants, and no displacement of businesses. We do support the Density Done Right proposal that's been proposed by Supervisors Peskin and Marr, which would make for 100% affordable according to neighborhood median income, which is very important. We see the disparity of income that's very striking between different districts and in different neighborhoods. Very, very striking, especially our seniors that are making very, very little money, whose income is very much on the lower end of the spectrum, which is made that much lower by the influx of the bigger money that's come in, and it's skewed the numbers in a very severe way. So again, yes to the Density Done Right proposal as proposed by Supervisors Peskin and Marr. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Jim Lazarus, San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Supervisor Tang, for taking on a very difficult issue. Some of us have been around here long enough to remember when the city was, perhaps unfortunately, downzoned in the early 1970s, and housing development in all neighborhoods has really suffered from that downzoning. Smart growth is needed not only on transit corridors in the East Bay, smart growth is needed on transit corridors and commercial districts in San Francisco. The legislation before you does not demolish any habitable housing, does not impact existing commercial uses, but it brings a variety of housing stock for working families as well as low-income residents by adding an increment in different corners of the city throughout San Francisco. As I listen to the opponents speaking so fondly of an alternative piece of legislation, I wonder really how many thousands of units can be built with that alternative legislation. If we're going to build housing for market rate, working families, and affordable housing, we need to do it in all parts of San Francisco where it makes sense. Not just downtown, not just in south of Market, but we need to identify locations throughout the city that allow a mix of housing to be built. The legislation introduced by Supervisor Tang is a first step, and we support that legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, John Winston. I sit on a couple of CACs, Pedestrian Safety and the Balboa Reservoir CAC, but I come to you today as a family member who lives in the city. I'm working class. I'm a printer. I've printed all of your campaign materials at one time or another over the years, so I'm definitely an important person in this town. And I live in an RH1 neighborhood. My kids go to Mission High School, and I live in the west side of town, and I pay much more than 50% of my income on housing. This legislation, especially with today's amendments, I think is going to be is moving in the right direction. I would like to see as much housing built as possible with consideration to neighborhood character. I think it can happen. We're working on that in my neighborhood. I think we can build lots of housing in the west side of town as well as the east side of town in a way that can respect neighborhood character. And I'm depending on more housing so that I can stay in the city and make the contributions I'm making through my family and through my political work and through my work And I also want to make sure that my kids have a chance to stay here when they grow up because they're in the city that they love and they grew up in. Thank you.
Hello, Supervisors. Christy Wong from SPUR, Community Planning Policy Director. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the Affordable Housing Bonus Program. We applaud the Planning Department and the Supervisor Katie Tang's open ears and willingness to make amendments to this legislation in response to many concerns about residential and commercial displacement. We urge you to support the bonus program for the many reasons that have been mentioned before. In addition to increasing the overall supply of both affordable and market rate housing, encouraging higher densities in the right kinds of places, spreading out housing across our city, creating a much needed middle income program, and improving the feasibility of certain vacant and underutilized sites around the city. And that's all without public subsidy. So we understand that Supervisors Mar and Peskin have a competing proposal that would only offer incentives to 100% affordable projects, and we're concerned by the limited applicability of a proposal like that. It doesn't address the state's requirement for a density bonus program, which is the whole reason we're having this conversation. It's likely to create only hundreds of affordable housing units instead of thousands of them, or tens of thousands of them. And it wouldn't take advantage of the available levers to encourage the construction of more affordable housing without public subsidy. So we urge you to recommend the full program for approval. Like all housing solutions, this is not a magic bullet. It's just one more tool in the toolkit, and we hope that you will move this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Andy Thornley, West Side neighbor. My wife and I rent. We've rented for 30 years. We need more housing in this city. My wife and I have been evicted twice in this very young century, twice. Affluent, overeducated, noisy white people like me getting evicted. There is a housing problem. I support the Affordable Housing Bonus Program. This is about the 5th or 6th hearing that I've attended. There's been a heck of a lot of talk about it. I've been out walking around, talking to people, looking at things. If we adopt the full AHBP, we will be complying with state law. That's a pretty good thing, I think. And let me point out that even if we do that, it will not create any housing for my household. I will still make too much money to benefit from this. But there may be a little less pressure on the housing that we do have, and maybe I won't get evicted for a third time. We have to build more housing. That's really, really critical. Whatever housing we build relieves the pressure. But above all, we have to build housing for our workforce. And yes, we have to build 100% affordable. By God, we do. Let's make sure we build housing for teachers. Let's make sure we build housing for cops and for firemen. We used to oblige our public safety folks to live in the city. We can't oblige that anymore. You can't afford to live in the city if you're a cop or a fireman, not a junior young cop or fire person, right? Next disaster, I want to know there are cops living in the city. And we got to build housing for them. We got to build housing for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was actually a function of a federal Supreme Court decision that said that cities could not require their employees to live within their jurisdictions.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. I'm going to call up a few more speaker cards. Catherine, David Chenzi, Rose Hilson, Tez Wellborn, Dennis Moscovian, Dennis Antonori, Eileen Boken, and Lori Liederman.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Valentino. I'm here as the president of the South Beach Mission Bay Merchants Association, also as an affordable housing attorney for my day job. I think I'm here supporting Supervisor Tang's Affordable Housing Bonus Program as amended. I grew up middle class, and recently the building I live in, which has on-site inclusionary units, had 3 middle class units come up for rent. They were in great rent price ranges. I shared it on Facebook, and within hours, just dozens of friends were calling and asking about it. It's unbelievable. We don't always hear about the demand for middle-class housing, but we know it. We know too well how much it's there. The number of people who make even over that amount, but still under the amount to live in market-rate housing is incredible. This program's definitely needed. It's time. The time is right to prioritize the production of housing. Every analysis tells us how important supply is. We're talking about middle-class housing and low-income housing, and so we've got to get this done. It's very important for our community. It's very important for the middle class to stay here. These are the narratives we've heard over and over again. It's time to get this legislation passed. Again, we support Supervisor Katie Tang's legislation as amended. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Tim Colin on behalf of the 300 members of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. We want to express our strongest support for Supervisor Tang's AHBP, the full proposal. And want to also commend the Mayor's Office of Housing and the Planning Department in the highest terms for the incredible research and analyses they've conducted to bring this policy forward. It's been a long time in coming, and it's had solid research that backs it. We think that it's probably the city's best chance to craft a proposal that's going to bring us into compliance with the state density bonus law. And a day of reckoning is coming on that with the number of projects that have been submitted to the planning department under state rules. We need some clarification, and this is one. Not sure we can support conditional use for housing, in particular conditional use for 100% affordable, because it puts the burden of proof on the developer to say this housing is necessary or desirable in a city that routinely hires attorneys to stop projects. I'm not convinced that the density done right is the answer, and it seems so much more limited than the very, very modest AHBP program. The density done right, it's hard to imagine we're going to get more than 100 or 150 units in the next decade out of it. We can do much more than this. And I'd also say that the AHBP appears to be prescient because it anticipated the direction Governor Brown is going in this, where he's saying the state has got to implement principles of density bonus and build more housing, market rate housing, and use that tool to subsidize affordable housing because, as the governor says, I'm not much interested in state funding to pay for affordable housing. It just doesn't scale to the need. So this comes closest to what we...
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Fernando Marti with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. And I'm actually pretty happy today because just last week we won Prop C, which I believe was endorsed by every one of you. We won with 67% of the vote, and it mandates that 25% of our housing is going to be affordable in every market rate development from here on out. So I'm a little confused why we're arguing over something that's going to get us 30% in exchange for some pretty amazing bonuses. Because we weren't prepared for this discussion, we thought we were going to be here talking about 100% affordable. I haven't forwarded the letter and the analysis that we gave to the Planning Commission back on February 25th. But I want to talk specifically about District 4 because this is where some of the most amazing bonuses are that the AHDB would do. On Sloat Boulevard, where the Sloat Garden Center is and the Irish Hall, the AHDB as written will give a 570% bonus to those property owners. On Irving and Taraval, the AHDB will give a 230% bonus to those property owners just by signing a piece of paper right here. On the other hand, Mr. Colin talked about the state density bonus program, which gives a 35% bonus for that additional bump. Part of the reason why the Planning Commission did not recommend moving forward with the whole AHDB is because they understood that the feasibility study that was done was very complicated and frankly amateurish. 3 random sites were selected to be studied, and sites such as Sloat Boulevard or Taraval or Irving were not analyzed in their complexity. It is important that only the 100% affordable, which I understand you all have been working on diligently, be moved forward.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, my name is Dennis Moscofian. I want to address the AHBP that came to you from the Planning Commission without a vote or a recommendation and only amended without public notice. It still ignores all but 2 of the Planning Commission's recommendations given on February 25th. That's rather arrogant. This AHBP is still mandatory demolition program. It still targets 30,500 parcels, as far as I know, all over the city's neighborhood commercial districts for displacement. It's redevelopment under a cover of affordable housing. I'm strongly in favor of affordable housing. In their place would be at least 70% unaffordable market rate units, 18% more for folks earning 140% AMI, and new retail space that would be mostly affordable to corporate retail. That's a total of 88% of the units that laborers, gardeners, and I'm a union guy, auto mechanics, bicycle mechanics, welders, printers, cooks, clerical staff, secretaries, baristas, cab drivers, hotel and hospital workers, roofers, carpenters, and most teachers cannot afford. The market rate-based program is not good policy. It doesn't stabilize communities, it displaces and disrupts. Now, this proposal should be rejected until the density done right, development without displacement that was introduced last week can be heard here. The density done right, development without displacement, is good policy and is a good usable tool to create affordable housing. It's supported by a broad consensus of tenant neighborhood, small business, and affordable housing organizations and retail uses. It incorporates the Commission's recommendations. It offers a height bonus. It proposes to price the affordable units according to neighborhood median income level, and it requires Planning Commission approval for projects to ensure those preconditions are followed. Finally, unlike AHBP, it respects San Francisco's neighborhood needs and residents. Thank you. And by the way, the general plan amendment should be voted down.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Henry Kornilowicz, President of the San Francisco Council of District Merchant Associations. We're very concerned in the small business world about losing our spaces because of development. One thing we don't have rent protection, unlike in the residential world, which people do have. In small business, you don't have that. And the other thing is that most small businesses have regular clients. People come there all the time. If there's any displacement, that's pretty well the business is going to be gone. So I think we should really rethink this, the effect that's going to have on displacement, particularly of small business. So I'd urge you to really take some deep thought about it and consider the proposals brought up by Supervisor Peskin. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Eileen Boken, a longtime District 4 resident, here in opposition to the general plan amendments as they do not reflect the amendments currently under consideration. I would urge the committee to move this item forward with a negative recommendation. For the density bonus program, I would urge the supervisors to continue to sync the mayor's and supervisors Tang's legislation with the Peskin-Mar density done right legislation for the 100% affordable housing component. For the mixed income program, to move this component forward, we'll revisit the scenarios from last year, such as the community meeting at the Ortega Library. The mixed income component needs to be severed from the 100% affordable component and not moved forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. This is Tess Wellborn with D5 Action. And thank you, Supervisor Tang, for putting in no demolition of existing housing in both of them. That's great.
Thank you for hearing it.
Yes. I would encourage this committee to sever the two things, affordable housing and the mixed income housing, and go ahead with talking more about the affordable, seeing how we can get that, because we do have enough money in the city with the housing bond and other sources of money that we can leverage to build maybe 5,000 units of affordable housing. And so by working together, you supervisors can make that happen. I'd like to call to your attention, if you haven't seen it, at the Institute of Government Studies at the University of California in Berkeley in May this year published a study, Housing Production, Filtering, and Displacement, Untangling the Relations. And what they found was that in order to reduce the displacement pressure, you have to build twice as many subsidized housing units as you do build market rate. And that in addition, in areas like San Francisco, where we have a great deal of income differences and displacement, that we can't rely on filtration, the idea that somehow there'll be trickle down and more units will become affordable. What we have to do is aggressive retention of all housing stock. And you're saying yes to no demolition is a step in that direction, and there are many other steps that we have to take. So let's work on getting your legislation and the other supervisors together and do a few more things. Let's get the general plan amendment gone for now until we can refine it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. And any other members who didn't turn in a speaker card, just please line up by the windows.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Kathy DeVincenzi. The proposed general plan amendment is overly broad and was drafted to support all 4 versions of the mayor's proposed programs, but I understand that all 4 may not be advanced. The general plan amendment should be rejected entirely in its current form and should be substantially revised and tailored to the compromise version or whatever amended version of the ordinance is ultimately advanced. For example, as I said in my February 25 letter to the Planning Commission, which I am resubmitting, the local program conflicts with state law as it would use the unlawful standard of review of demonstrating to the satisfaction of the environmental review officer that a local project does not cause a significant impact. However, state law requires the use of the fair argument standard to determine the significance of an environmental impact under CEQA. In addition, the proposed general plan amendment would have potentially significant impacts that must be analyzed in an EIR and is otherwise objectionable for the reasons set forth in my February letter. Also, the city would act at its own risk if it were to approve the proposed general plan amendment and the mayor's programs today soon, because they rely primarily on the adequacy of the final environmental impact report for the 2009 housing element, and the legal adequacy of that EIR is now being considered by the California Court of Appeal and has not been finally decided. The general plan amendments would substantially weaken housing element policies designed to avoid substantially impacting existing neighborhood character, including policies 11.3 and 11.5, and they would also amend tables which contain numerical density standards in average units per.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
We'll pick those up.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Rose Hilson. I was going to talk about what was posted on the website, but then now I see there's been a change. Part of what I'm going to read. The original AHBP, the one that's posted on the website, back on February 25, the Planning Commission requested more work on it in at least 6 categories and forwarded it to the board with no recommendation. So even though I understand that planning was working on it for 2 years, I'm part of the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods Land Use Committee, and we didn't hear it till really close to the time when it was supposed to get adopted. And so with this new middle-income housing program, proposal, I don't see any new text on this, and I'm getting concerned that today it's the same kind of process. I'm into this process thing, and if we do that again, I'm afraid this thing could get even more railroaded down the way. So I still see a few issues. There's no CU for the affordable housing portion. There's only the mixed-use portion, and density is based on form rather than square footage of lot. That's basically zoning of lots. Neighborhood-specific AMIs still need to be refined. And the general plan amendment as written does not incorporate the latest changes, so may as well just forward that to the board with no recommendation. And I can see right now we're not going to be singing Kumbaya. Both sides need to get back together and look at both sides of this legislation with the people who spoke earlier as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Kumbaya, my Lord.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Lori Lederman. First, please do send the general plan amendment to the full board with a negative recommendation. It is gratifying to hear Supervisor Tang offering some amendments to the Affordable Housing Bonus Program, the market rate plan, that is, particularly prohibiting demolition of all residential housing and retaining the conditional use process. But it is distressing that we, the public, are once again, just now today, hearing about these amendments that we have not yet seen. The public outreach done by the Planning Department occurred only after a huge public demand for input, after we learned that the plan would rezone the entire city on about a 2.5-month timeline over the holidays. Today, sadly, this process failure is being repeated. According to Kathleen Pender's piece in the Sunday Chronicle, we are now overproducing market rate housing, but rents are not coming down in new construction. In the rare cases where they have come down in older buildings, they are still far out of reach of all the levels of the underserved population. We don't need more market rate housing. If I understand the amendments offered today to the market rate plan, they do not address many problems raised with that proposal by the public and by members of the Planning Commission. Most importantly among those, it continues to target directly demolition of neighborhood-serving businesses, the very businesses that make San Francisco a livable, walkable city. We need a 100% affordable program. We need density done right, as proposed by Supervisors Peskin and Marr. And a 100% affordable housing with a density bonus needs and warrants a conditional use permit. It is different from waiving a CU when a project is already consistent with local zoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. And again, if any other speakers wish to comment, please line up by the windows.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Corey Smith. I am the community organizer with the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for letting us speak today. And again, on behalf of our 300 business and individual members, we fully support the Affordable Housing Bonus Program as is. Our organization has been involved in the legislation since 2014. Both our business members and our individual members have had the opportunity to provide input and fully endorse this program. It's not just the two members of our organization speaking here today that support. We have an additional 800 signatures as well as 25 video submissions that you should have been getting that were sent to individual supervisors that were sent to the individual supervisors from supporters that are at work today. We have heard concerns about the Affordable Housing Bonus Program, and we think that they have been addressed through not only the amendments introduced today, but I know, looking back to my communications from February, when Supervisor Breed introduced her rent control amendment before the 25th hearing, they had been online. The Housing Action Coalition specifically likes this for a couple of reasons, and as a young person, I know I'm a big fan of housing density in transit-rich areas. I also really like the fact that 40% of the units within these projects will be 2 bedrooms or more. As somebody that would like to have a family here one day, that is something that will help. Further, it is a complete full-spectrum plan. It is low, it is middle, and it is market rate. A true socioeconomically diverse city is the city that I want to live in. Additionally, the market rate housing will be able to subsidize that low and middle income portion. In a city that does not have enough money for affordable housing, every dollar counts. Lastly, as it has been repeated, there's not one answer to our housing crisis, but I beg of you, this is one of the pieces that will help. It is not an or answer. It's the AHBP and the next thing and the next thing. And it's really tough.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Supervisors. Dennis Antonori with San Franciscans for Community Planning. I'd like to speak and concentrate my remarks on the issue of the retention of small neighborhood-serving businesses, which has not been adequately dealt with either in the general plan amendment or in the underlying the underlying program. One's reminded of the San Francisco redevelopment projects that took place in the Western Addition, where there were promises of the retention and preservation of small businesses, which totally and completely failed. Virtually no businesses survived the displacement that took place during that redevelopment process. Hundreds of small businesses were lost forever. And it actually has to this day, really changed that community into one that's hardly a community at all, because it doesn't have that basis of neighborhood-serving businesses available to it. The idea that somehow we would put off this question for some future study doesn't really make sense to me. It's too important an issue to just put off and say we're going to find ways to preserve businesses. One of the suggestions that was made by staff was that we adopt the federal standards for relocation in cases where federal government takes over properties. The Small Business Commission looked at that question and concluded that those provisions are totally inadequate and that we would end up losing virtually all of the small businesses if we adopted those programs. It's going to take a big amount to be able to preserve and retain businesses. And that needs to be dealt with before anything is adopted, not afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Sean Grunberger. I'm a 16-year resident of San Francisco. I live in the Mission District. This proposal won't benefit me personally, but I still support it because I think it's a modest and pragmatic improvement toward making San Francisco a better place to live. I sort of feel like, from what I've heard of the alternatives, that the alternatives represent the status quo, and I think the numbers from the planning department make clear that status quo isn't good enough for San Francisco. I don't understand how the status quo will help working people in the city, especially those who don't live here yet but will in the future. And I don't understand how the status quo is going to help small business. So my opinion is that this sounds like a reasonable, modest approach, and I hope you'll approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Peter Cohen, Council of Community Housing Organizations. We have an opportunity moment today after months of cantankerous process going back to September of last year, and really a proposal that was much too complex and big to be swallowed coming out of the Planning Commission, limping its way to you. And what we can do now is focus on what everyone seems to agree with, which is, at least as a first step, 100% affordable projects can be advanced, and we can increase the efficiency and the density of those projects. And this is no small thing about creating new certainty for affordable housing throughout the neighborhoods of San Francisco. As you know, most of our affordable housing projects are built on the east side in about a third of the city. And it's been difficult to have that kind of certainty for projects in many of the neighborhoods. And what this is the roadmap for that to happen more frequently in more places, and we take advantage of that over time. And I think that's what this program does. It builds the kind of confidence and trust that we can increase density, we can do it right, we can use 100% affordable as the test case for how to do that, both from a process standpoint and getting the policies right. I thank Supervisor Tang for introducing some amendments today and for hearing some of the recommendations that came out of the Planning Commission. But again, there were some of the recommendations that came out of the Planning Commission. There were a number of things that they suggested that people have been advocating for. And 100% affordable, again, is a kind of test case to be able to do that. And we're suggesting focusing on that, coming back in several weeks' time has been seemed to discuss here, and marrying these two proposals together and having a single measure to go forward to the board, and not choking that again with trying to do too much too fast. We've been committed from the beginning to expanding affordable housing and density bonus through a number of tools. This is the right tool to start with. We suggest you move this forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on items 4 and 5, please come on up. Seeing none, then, Madam Chair, if we could please close public comment. Thank you very much to everyone who came out.
Thank you, everyone who's come for public comment. Public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Tang, Supervisor Peskin, I see your name on the...
I'm happy to I'm happy to defer to the sponsor of the measure that is in front of us, and will reserve my comments if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciated hearing all the public comment here today, and there are a couple of points that I did want to address. First of all, I'm going to repeat one more time one of the major amendments I'm making to the mixed income program, which is that we are prohibiting the demolition of existing residential units, which includes rent-controlled units, from participation in the AHBP. That is an amendment that, again, Supervisor Breed announced many months ago, but we are actually putting it into the legislation today, hopefully after this committee votes on it. So in terms of the demolition concern, I really hope that that addresses it because, again, we're prohibiting the demolition of existing residential units for both the mixed income program and the 100% program. Secondly, I know that some folks have been made some comments about not knowing about the full AHBP program and feeling like the information was sprung on them. Actually, our AHBP program had both components, a mixed income component as well as a 100% program. Since 2013, when we were first exploring this, it's on the agenda, so it's fully clear. Second thing that I want to bring up is that all of the amendments that I have proposed today were actually discussed at the Planning Commission. So we are also not trying to pull one over anyone. These were all recommendations made and discussed, and we actually said that, yes, we would agree to make as many as we possibly could. I know that there's still much more that could be done about the small business side of things and preservation, and we're not trying to punt this off to future studies or so forth. We simply cannot draft it right now legally, as well as even Supervisor Peskin's version, the density done right version. There are certain things that both of us cannot draft. So again, we're not trying to delay this for any particular reason. In terms of the timing of this, I know that one of the last comments made was about let's not try to jam too much so quickly. We were perfectly willing to wait until the feasibility analysis was going to be done for the mixed income program, which is around the fall, until we were going to move forward with any part of AHBP. Given that there is now a 100% program that is has been introduced, that is why we have triggered this conversation here. But otherwise, we were perfectly willing to look and see what the feasibility analysis would have revealed in terms of what parcels would actually be able to build more affordable housing units on, and then move forward with a more refined map of those eligibility sites. Lastly, I will just say that in terms of the alternative density done right proposal, again, there are many elements that are very similar. We have always had a 100% program in our component, and I know that that is the focus of Supervisor Peskin and Marr's version. However, I will just say that I don't believe that anyone can truly say that they really support affordable housing if we're actually trying to put more restrictions on building affordable housing. And one of the things that unfortunately I disagree with is requiring a conditional use process for 100% affordable housing projects. I have no problem with that for mixed income, but for 100% affordable, that is something I cannot agree to. Secondly, I cannot agree to trying to restrict more parcels for where it is eligible, we are eligible to build 100% projects on. Yes, for mixed income, fine to consider more restrictions, but for the 100%, which we, as a reminder, only build one or two of each year on average in this city, why should we put more restrictions on that program? So those are a few of the things that, again, really two main points that I disagree with. The rest of it, in concept, very supportive of. For example, preservation of neighborhood serving businesses, all of that Supervisor Peskin has, that's nothing we didn't want to include in ours. So with that said, colleagues, I would just ask that you adopt the amendments that I have proposed today, all that were discussed by the Planning Commission at full public hearings. And then what I would also like to suggest then is that we duplicate the file and we move forward to the full board, the 100% program as was slightly amended, which is just to prohibit the demolition of existing residential units, forward to the full board.
Thank you very much. I see we've got some remarks from Supervisor Weiner. Excuse me, I thought that was old. Mr. Peskin, you want to speak?
I'm happy to jump in at this point.
Okay.
So first of all, let me agree with many of the speakers from both sides, if you will, which is I agree that we have to continue to expand the toolbox for housing starts in San Francisco, particularly affordable housing starts. And we're doing that in many ways, whether it's accessory dwelling unit legislation originally pioneered by Supervisor Wiener and now spreading citywide, whether it's cracking down on those institutions and individuals that have taken hundreds of units off of the market. You know what I'm talking about, whether it's our recent short-term rental legislation, whether it's Proposition C that was embraced by the voters, or whether it is some form of this affordable housing density bonus program, which, by the way, has been on the books of the state of California since 1979 and has been accommodated in San Francisco through the use of SUDs over time. And I agree that we need to get our hands around it. I also, and I say with due respect to SPUR and due respect to the Chamber of Commerce and due respect to our planning department, which is a much more enlightened planning department than we had in the days of Justin Herman, that we have over time made terrible mistakes that have ripped communities asunder. And we need to rather than do this in an ivory tower, figure out ways that we can increase our production of housing, particularly affordable housing, and make sure that we have communities that stay intact, that we do not evict people. And indeed, I am delighted that the Planning Commission made that recommendation. I'm delighted that, although Supervisor Bree did not actually, to the gentleman from the Housing Action Coalition, introduce any amendments. She spoke to some several months ago, and those amendments are before us today. But quite frankly, and I'm not saying this in an accusatory fashion, our ivory tower, smart, educated people came up with a plan originally that actually did not have those safeguards. And if it were not for this robust, controversial conversation that's been happening now for many, many months, we would not have come to that right conclusion. And we've got to get it right relative to small businesses as well. I hear people speak to the fact that the Planning Commission made these recommendations, and while it is true that the version of this legislation that Supervisor Marr and I have introduced incorporates more of the Planning Commission's recommendations, particularly and in the study that the Planning Department did with David Baker, you identified some 241 soft sites that would produce approximately 5,000 units of affordable housing in those locations without displacement and what have you. I lost my train of thought there for a second. HDP. I was going to say that we are under no obligation to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation. So I don't want to come along and say, you know, the Marr-Peskin legislation deals with soft sites and requires CUs and has neighborhood incomes. Those are all things that are incorporated in the Marr-Peskin legislation. I think they are compelling things to consider, but this Board of Supervisors ultimately, by a majority vote, can choose to accept recommendations or not accept recommendations. So I want to make that very clear. What I would like to do is duplicate the file and amend in the density done right, cute name, and then that will then have to be referred to the Planning Department for environmental review. It will not need to go back to the Planning Commission because I am keeping out the fee provision that would trigger another Planning Commission hearing, and that is the sanguine advice that I've received from legal counsel. I would like to make a motion and to my colleagues that are members of the Land Use Committee, however you want to do it. I would prefer to send it with a recommendation of do not pass as to item number 5, but we could also send it without recommendation, and I would accept Supervisor Tang's amendments so that when the Planning Department has reviewed the duplicated file for environmental determination, we can continue this conversation. I think we're moving together. I think there is more to be done, and I actually would like to get the representatives from the Council of Community Housing Organizations together with Supervisor Tang and myself for an offline discussion, conversation, negotiation in the days ahead. So those would be my motions.
All right, thank you very much. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't think that this legislation has anything to do with the ivory tower. This legislation, frankly, is about the reality that we face in San Francisco, where we are in a deep housing crisis because we don't have enough housing. We have 200,000 more people in this city than we had in 1980, and I know Supervisor Peskin disputed those numbers last week at the Board of Supervisors, but if you look at the census, in the 1980 census, we had 650,000 residents. Today we have about 850,000 residents, and before long we're going to have 1 million, and the Bay Area is going to have 2 million more, and the Bay Area has grown by 2.5 million people since 1980. And it is not ivory tower at all to say that we need more housing in this city. We need more affordable housing. We need more housing overall, period. And this program, this Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program, is a very elegant way of coming out of the ivory tower and putting more housing on the ground in a dispersed way, in a sensitive way, in a way where we are going to generate significant new housing spread across our city and not just concentrated in a few neighborhoods, and where we will generate significant numbers of below market rate subsidized affordable housing at zero cost to the taxpayer. That is what this is about, and it is very tangible and very real, and we need it. You can't talk about reducing displacement without actually increasing housing. We will never be able to address displacement in this city in a meaningful way unless and until we are creating enough housing to house our growing population. The heart of displacement is when you have a lot of people who want to live in a limited housing stock, and you have competition for that housing, and people get pushed out. And this program, again, it's as Planning Department noted, it is not a silver bullet, but this program will help us generate significant amount of housing. I'm appreciative of Supervisor Tang's amendments, and particularly the amendment that prohibits the demolition of housing, including rent-controlled housing. That was a concern of mine as well when this was first introduced, and that has been corrected, and I'm very appreciative for that. So I would be supportive of this entire program. Of course, I support the 100% program, but the 100% program, while it will produce affordable housing, it will not produce anywhere near the amount of even affordable housing that we need, let alone housing overall. Affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing, is incredibly important, and we all support it and we all want more. Subsidized affordable housing by itself will never solve our housing crisis. It is one piece of the puzzle, but it will not solve the problem by itself. We have to have more housing of all types, and this program will help us create that housing of all types: low-income housing, middle-income housing, market rate housing, and so I support it. The Density Done Right program, to me, is absolutely shooting ourselves in the foot. It's limiting the program to only 100% affordable and then saying we're going to make it extra hard to build that affordable housing. Let's put as many roadblocks in the way as possible to actually build even 100% affordable housing. This board just passed legislation earlier this year to remove conditional use requirements for 100% affordable housing. Why would we ever put additional obstacles in the way of creating 100% affordable housing? And so those, colleagues, that's my take on this legislation, and I look forward to the continuing conversation today.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. My question is, I believe, to the Planning Department, and Mr. Peskin, let me know if you want to jump in on this. So one of the proposals that I've heard today comes from the Peskin-Marr version of the legislation, proposes that new neighborhoods base the AMI system based on the AMI within the department, within a neighborhood. So I don't know who can answer this. So the question that, or the concern that I have is that it seems like we will be getting away from a movement of trying to get away from our old way of thinking in terms of concentrating poverty in one localized area. So if you put so let me back up. So the details are not clear to me. Perhaps we can start there on what the AMI levels will be and how you are going to apply them to the neighborhood, how you're defining neighborhood, what's the formula that you're going to be using to even come up with these AMI levels. And as you can imagine, I can see both sides of the coin. For a neighborhood like the Bayview community, where we know that there are low AMI levels, it makes sense to keep something low, perhaps arbitrarily low, to keep the gentrifying forces from moving into the neighborhood. I get that. But on the other hand, it also seems like it keeps the AMI level, would also keep the AMI levels, keeping the AMI levels low would artificially make it keep a low-income neighborhood, thus never really allowing full, fluid, upward mobility in building a diverse mix of housing opportunities available to the neighbors. So help me reconcile this. I don't know if I like it or if I hate it.
Good question.
Now it's on. Thank you, Supervisor John Ram, Planning Department. I think the issue that you referred to came out of the discussion of the middle income portion of our proposed program, and there was a lot of concern raised by members of the community that income level was too high relative to the median incomes of certain parts of the city. So the recommendation that came out of the Planning Commission was for us to look more specifically at certain neighborhood income levels to see if that level of the program could be reduced to recognize the actual incomes in those parts of the city, and also recognizing that housing costs in those parts of the city might be a little bit less because of land costs being cheaper. So it was really that discussion. We haven't developed the actual specifics yet, but that was what the Planning Commission asked us to consider in the next round.
So have you started moving down that path?
We're just starting the analysis of that. I don't think we've not made any conclusions on that yet.
And what exactly is going to go into the analysis? Have you figured out your methodology, or is it an established methodology that already exists to help you come up with this formula?
Sure. And to your point, it is a relatively new idea for the city, so we've been working with the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to really grapple with that issue, because we do understand there are competing policy objectives, right? There's this idea of making sure the housing that's built in each neighborhood is affordable for the people that live there, but we don't want to go so far as, to your point, where we are concentrating poverty or certain income levels in each neighborhood. So we've just started kind of scoping out an approach to that. One thing would be to look at the neighborhood AMIs. Another thing that we think might be more compelling is to look at the neighborhood fair market rent and the rents in that neighborhood. So we'd like to take some time this summer to really kind of develop those varying ideas, work with some stakeholders, and kind of make sure we're balancing those two competing policy objectives should the board choose to move forward with that kind of policy.
Have you identified which baseline year you're going to be using to figure out AMI levels? As you know, economies go up and they come down as do individual household income. So are you basing it off of a really robust year? Is it a small year? Or maybe my assumptions are incorrect and maybe a benchmark year is inconsequential when it comes to figuring out the formula?
Well, I think the AMIs are calculated annually. So on some level, it would be very easy, but it is an interesting question. If a building is built, does that AMI change every year?
So my question is, I know they're calculated annually. Which year do you use? Which year are you going to be selecting? From 1985, 2008? Like, I don't quite understand.
Well, we would use the previous year for incomes or rents.
So you would use the most recent.
And then each year it would be updated, correct.
So I would imagine, and I'm going to stick with my example of the Bayview, for example, as the neighborhood has changed drastically, even in the last 6 years that I've been on the Board of Supervisors, there have been incredibly large and wealthy gentrifying forces that have moved in that I would imagine would factor into the AMI level that you will use as a baseline. So I guess I put it back to you. How do we reconcile this? How do you get something, I guess, that would be fair so that we're not Because from what I understand, what we're trying to do is not price people out of the neighborhood. Is that correct? I mean, is that why we're using AMI as an indicator?
I think that's the logic behind that kind of policy idea.
Right. So, which AMI baseline do we use?
Right. So our first instinct would be to use like the annual update, but I think all of these intricacies that you're unpacking are why we really think developing a program like this will take the summer probably to kind of understand what a neighborhood AMI looks like and how it functions and what any intended or unintended consequences of using that kind of methodology would be.
And you also mentioned something about the cost of the land. Does that also mean you'll use an annualized, I don't know, average for the cost of land? Again, sticking with like the Bayview example, to figure out for it to factor into your AMI formula.
That could be a factor that we consider. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to be watching this really closely because naturally I can see both sides, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm concerned because experience on a daily basis what happens when you concentrate poverty, and it leads to violence and it leads to generational poverty. And so I don't want to put forth and support a piece of policy that has good intentions but actually ends up hurting a neighborhood in the long term. And I understand that this conversation is very early. I hope to be helpful in the discussion as we begin to really map out what exactly it's going to look like and how we're going to go about with the evaluation. All right, thank you. Are there any other members? Supervisor Tang has something to say.
Thank you. I really appreciate your questions around the neighborhood AMI system because I do share a lot of the same concerns. However, so we did not propose a neighborhood AMI system for the mixed income program. In the density done right version, there is a proposal for a neighborhood AMI system, which to me doesn't really make sense for a 100% program. And I'd actually like to call up Sophie Hayward from Mayor's Office of Housing to explain that, how it would even work, if it would work.
Thank you very much. You're correct. The proposal to use an up to 100% of the neighborhood zip code-based AMI is applicable only in the 100% proposal set forth by Supervisors Peskin and Marr. And for for most CD-financed 100% affordable projects, we are required, when we use federal tax credits, to limit the affordability to 60% of the city's AMI. In the vast majority of neighborhoods, 60% AMI using the HUD number is less than 100% of the neighborhood AMI. There are a limited number of neighborhoods, very limited, in which we would have to make the units less expensive than they are in our typical affordable housing product, but it's very limited. I would say three zip codes have an AMI level that is lower than our typical 100% affordable product.
And which one of those three, do you know the three zip codes off the top?
I can grab it for you.
Okay, grab. Supervisor Peskin has a question as well.
And Ms. Hayward, just for everybody's information, do you want to let us know what is 100%, 120%, and 140% of AMI for an individual in San Francisco?
You can go ahead and answer the first question about the zip codes.
I've got the paperwork right here,
Perfect.
So I'll jump in. Kate Hartley, Mayor's Office of Housing. So 100% AMI for one person in San Francisco 2016 is $75,400. For two people, it's $86,150, and for a household of three, it's $96,950. That's 100% of area median income 2016.
And 120 and 140 would be what?
For 120, one person, $90,500, two people, $103,400, three people, $116,350. 140 for one person is $105,550. Two people is $120,600, and for 3 people, it's $135,750. And just to that point, as you know, the vast majority of the housing that we build, almost all of it, is to households at or below 60% of area median income. Within our developments, we include at least a 20% set aside for chronically homeless individuals. So our average AMI hovers around hovers around 40% on average, because we typically set as our target 50% of AMI for most units, but in some cases we go a little above to a maximum of 60. Now, we do have some neighborhoods that have very, very low median incomes. Those include the Tenderloin, Treasure Island.
Do you know what those, can you
Yes.
call the numbers?
The median income for the Tenderloin right now is $30,700. And so for a family, a household of 2, that's around 35% of area median income. Treasure Island is a special case, of course, because there's a transitional population. Chinatown, the median income is about $28,000 for a household of 2. That, again, is around 35% of area median income. So you have this small universe of neighborhoods that have very extremely low-income households. Those are developments with a high number of SROs, and my office is working on an SRO acquisition rehab program so we can really take our resources and target those special cases, because in those developments, it's very hard to finance an acquisition rehab under any circumstances.
Have you considered public housing as well? What, or I don't know if, do you know the numbers? I mean,
Yes.
you mentioned Tenderloin, you mentioned Chinatown.
So the
You
Tenderloin,
referenced TI.
Chinatown, virtually every neighborhood in the city does have public housing. As you know very well, we are rehabilitating 3,500 units of public housing right now. The average AMI for our public housing residents is actually less than $20,000 a year. So those households are at the 20% of AMI level, and we are putting enormous amount of resources right now to protecting those households and preserving that housing for the long term. It was actually at risk of loss.
Can you give me the AMI levels for the Visitation Valley neighborhood?
Yes. So the Visitation Valley median family income is $50,000. And for a household of 2, that's about 60% of area median income. For a household of 3, it's around 55.
Thank you. And that those numbers also reflect Sunnydale Public Housing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Supervisor Wiener, I see your name is next.
No.
Nope. Okay. Supervisor Tang?
Thank you. One thing I also did want to address regarding the demolition of existing residential units, I just wanted to point out that, yes, I will take full responsibility for not catching that it was not included as a prohibition in our legislation. However, I will say that the planning staff never took into consideration in their calculation the 5,000 units that we would build in San Francisco over 20 years, that we would be demolishing any existing residential units. So I just wanted to point that out. That was never part of their calculation. Lastly, I know that we are going to be talking a lot about our city's inclusionary housing requirements. And we have heard in previous hearings along those debates that in order to achieve 25% or more affordable housing in our projects, that there's some sort of public subsidy that, generally speaking, needs to be provided. So I actually think that this AHBP program has a lot to do with that conversation, and I think that we should continue that conversation when our feasibility analysis is also completed as well. So that concludes the comments that I have for today. And so again, I would just urge this committee to adopt the amendments that I had brought up earlier. I still would recommend that we duplicate the file and send forth the 100% program since there has been so much interest in that. And I would love to see us build more 100% affordable projects here in San Francisco sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Tang. So what I believe we're going to do now, colleagues, is we're going to take action on the amendments proposed by Supervisor Tang first. Supervisor Tang's made a series of amendments that have been read into the record. The language has been circulated, and we're good to go. No? Okay.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, you may be good to go. I would just suggest, it sounds like the committee, or at least Supervisors Tang and Peskin, are talking about 3 different versions of the legislation. Supervisor Tang's version, the original,
right,
which will be amended to include the early notifications and to prohibit demolitions of residential housing and to exclude everything but the 100% affordable program. Is that not right?
I mean, there's a couple other things. So, for example, requiring the CU.
That's in the market rate.
Yes,
right,
that's in the market rate.
So
for the 100%, yes, it would just be the prohibition of demolition of existing residential units.
And so that's version 1. 100% affordable only, prohibit demolition of residential units, and require early notification. Then a member of the committee could duplicate the file, and in the second version, you would have Supervisor Tang's other set of amendments regarding the mixed income program. And in the third version, the second duplicate, you would have, if the committee adopts Supervisor Peskin's amendments, you would have basically striking out more or less all of the text between pages 2 and 51 in the ordinance that's before you, and replacing it with the text of the Supervisors Peskin and Mars legislation, except without the fee waiver piece.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Again, we're going to take Supervisor Tang's amendments first. Yes, we can. Would you like Supervisor Tang to articulate them again?
Okay, I can read those into the record again. So first, I'll make the motion again, or not make the motion, I will read into the record the amendments to be made to the 100% program, which is prohibition of demolition of existing residential units, and secondly, early notification for businesses, which would take place no less than 18 months and be sent to both the tenant and OEWD.
Okay.
I'll move that amendment.
All right. Motion has been made to move the amendment, and can we take this without objection? All right. Without objection, those amendments pass, or accepted, I should say.
Okay.
Okay.
Through the chair, I'll make now, for the record, the amendments for the mixed income program. Number 1, prohibit demolition of existing residential units. Number 2, require a conditional use authorization process. Thirdly, we would be directing the city to explore establishing a small business relocation fee and first right of refusal, as well as other small business preservation tools. Fourth, require early notification to commercial tenants be no less than 18 months and be sent to both the tenant and OEWD. Fifth, we have a finding section that includes a reference to existing tools and support available to small business tenants in case of displacement. And lastly, which I neglected to mention, which I thought we were going to make later, but we actually did make here, is include at the ground floor level active uses at the same square footage, any neighborhood commercial uses that are demolished or removed.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, sorry. Do you want to duplicate the file first and then add Supervisor Tang's amendments?
No. But because they apply to different things, it can be done before you divide the file.
Because we're also talking about three different pieces of legislation in the end. So we're going to continue.
I defer to the city attorney, but essentially the amendments I just read have to do only with a mixed income program.
Which means there's no need to duplicate the file.
Well, or the file can be duplicated afterwards.
After the amendments, correct.
The amendments that you just made basically strike all the mixed income pieces out to include only the 100% affordable. Is that? That's what I believe Supervisor Tang has.
But whatever happens today, if this gets split and only 100% goes out, or if it all goes out, whatever happens, if this were to all proceed together, these amendments could all be in the same piece of legislation, some for mixed income, some for 100%. So I'd rather just put the amendments in, then we can have a discussion about whether to split things out or not.
Okay.
So
That works for me, yes.
Okay, so I'll move the amendments to the mixed income program that Supervisor Tang just articulated.
All right. Can we do that without objection, colleagues? All right. Without objection. All right. Moving on. Now, thank you, Supervisor Tang, for your amendments. Supervisor Peskin, you had a couple motions, I believe, or at least one.
So as stated by Deputy City Attorney Givner, I would like to duplicate the file, strike out all of the new text in Section 2 and Section 3, which would be pages 2 to 51, and amend in the density done right ordinance that we introduced last Tuesday, and leave in Supervisor Tang's amendments to Sections 250 and 260, and not have the fee provision as stated by Mr. Givner, and would like to then have that, if those amendments are accepted, referred to Planning for Environmental Review.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wiener has a few thoughts.
Yeah, I don't support this motion. Supervisors Peskin and Mar have every right in the world to introduce their own legislation, but I'm not going to support the amendment. I don't support the so-called density done right, which is really a measure that makes it harder to build all sorts of housing, including affordable housing.
Supervisor Peskin, can you tell us why you didn't, you and Supervisor Mar didn't just introduce new legislation?
We did introduce, this legislation was introduced last Tuesday.
Okay.
And in order to, I think, facilitate the conversation that is evolving amongst stakeholders and Supervisor Tang and the mayor's piece of legislation, as well as mine and Supervisor Mar's, this would actually bring that conversation together more quickly. If we don't do that, it means that it will be referred to the Planning Commission for a hearing, and it will just take a lot longer to hear the two pieces of legislation side by side and forge whatever compromise has yet to be forged.
All right. Well, we heard that we have the motion before us. Supervisor Tang, you have some remarks? Okay, let's do a roll call vote.
On the motion on the floor, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, no. You have one aye and two noes, the Supervisor Wiener and yourself dissenting.
All right, thank you. This motion fails. Thank you so much. All right. Is there any other business? Wait, hold on.
Item number 5.
All right.
Yes, and you need to, on the item with the on item number 4 with the 2 amendments that were accepted, would you like to send that forward to the board with a recommendation?
So through the chair, I would like to, now that I believe, I don't know if the motion has been made already to duplicate the file so that you can send forth just a 100% program.
No.
That motion needs to be made.
Okay, so if I could request the committee to make that motion then.
All right. Is there anyone in a motion to move the Supervisor Peskin? Is that a motion from you? No. Okay, just asking. All right. Motion has been made to move forward the 100% program. Supervisor Wiener, would you like to make that motion? A motion.
So the file has now been duplicated? Is
Yes.
that the?
So it's.
No.
Can I just see? I'm confused about
I have two,
what's being proposed.
I'm sorry, I have 2 amendments that were accepted by Supervisor Wiener. The prohibition.
Can you talk louder in the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are 2 amendments that were made. One accepted by Supervisor Wiener, the prohibition demo and early notification, and then the second one's mixed income program.
So we have not taken a motion. We haven't indicated whether it's a positive recommendation or not. I think that's what you were asking.
Right, if we're
initially
moving it forward to the board with a recommendation, or if we're duplicating. I know it failed the duplication.
So there is no recommendation. It's just
No
moving to the full board. That's the
Right.
language of the motion, and that's what's going to be moving forward.
Has anyone made a motion?
No.
No one's made a motion.
Supervisor Peskin, if I may, Supervisor Peskin has duplicated the file, so right now you have 2 versions of the file that are identical. Supervisor Peskin then moved to amend the duplicate, and that amendment failed. So you still have two versions of the file now before you in the committee.
Okay, Supervisor Tang, what were you asking?
So what I was asking for, thank you, you already adopted the amendments that I had asked for the mixed income program as well as the 100% program. Then I'd like to duplicate the file so that one version that stays in Land Use Committee has all the components, both the mixed income program, the 100% program as amended, and then one version has just the 100% program, and that moves forward to the full board. Even though ideally I would love to see the whole program move forward, I am willing to, right now at this moment in time, only move out the 100% program to the full board.
Supervisor Peskin?
So let's deal with political reality. Political reality is without the amendments that I offered that this committee killed, the version that you want to send to the full board is not going to survive, nor is the general plan amendment, so we're just wasting our time.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we were making a record of the discussion for future generations to come back and review. Supervisor Wiener?
I would hope that once this comes to the full board, that the Board of Supervisors will engage in a good debate about this. And I don't know what's going to happen. I can speculate. But I also think that there's value to having a debate at the full Board of Supervisors where members of the Board of Supervisors can go on record and say where they are. And do people want to make it easier or harder to create housing? Do people want to put more obstacles in the way of building affordable housing? Do we want more housing so that our kids and grandkids can actually live in San Francisco? Or are we going to continue to do what the city has done for a long time to make it as hard as possible to build housing so that the average rent is $3,500 a month, and so that my constituents and others' constituents are getting evicted from their homes and having to leave San Francisco because there's nowhere for them to live? So I'm happy to have that debate at the Board of Supervisors, and if my view doesn't prevail, it's happened before, it'll happen again, and I don't have a problem with that, but it's a worthwhile conversation to have. I would prefer to move the entire legislation out. Supervisor Tang is the author, and I will defer to her desire about her own legislation, but my preference would be to move the entire piece of legislation out, both the mixed income and the 100%.
Well, I understand that Supervisor Tang is not moving both pieces out largely because it's a compromise so that the conversation can continue to move forward in good faith and showing that she's interested in having a true dialogue. So why don't we honor the maker's desires? Let's I'd like to make a motion that we put in the 100% program. That's the prohibited demolition of existing residential units, and also amend it to reflect projects already prohibited on RH1 and RH2 for.
Sorry. I cut you off.
Yeah, you did. For density bonus. Supervisor Wiener, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I think those amendments have already been made. So I think the motion would be for one of the two duplicated files to strip out everything but the 100% program, and then we would send that 100% to the full board, and then take the other the other unamended file, or the file that contains the complete program, and continue it to the call of the chair.
All right, is that a motion?
Yes. Out of deference to the author, Supervisor Tang, that will be my motion.
All right, thank you very much. Comments?
And that would be with a positive, for the 100% program, with a positive recommendation to the full Board of Supervisors.
So at the full board, I will make a series of amendments with regard to conditional use and the other things set forth in the density done right proposal, and we'll take them in order next Tuesday.
All right, Supervisor Tang.
Thank you, and I'm fine with that if that is how you choose to move forward with this. I have always been open to working with everyone on this board on the full entire affordable housing bonus program. But if folks choose to introduce their own legislation, which they're absolutely entitled to do, and that's how you want to negotiate, that's fine with me. I'm also fine with holding people to the record that you want to put more obstacles to building more 100% affordable housing projects. Let's just do it that way then.
All right, so
I don't want to quibble, but the difference between getting rid of creations of SUDs and going to CUs is responsible legislation that actually removes barriers in an appropriate fashion that honors our neighborhoods and the fabric of our city and gives people a voice in the planning process.
All right, thank you. No more quibbling. We're done with the discussion now. We're just going to go ahead and do a roll call vote. Thank you.
So the motion on the floor then is to adopt the two amendments suggested by Supervisor Tang, and then to duplicate amending the 100% and recommending that to board.
No, I'm sorry. The motion is the other, Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
Those amendments have already been adopted. My motion is to take one version of the duplicated file and to remove the mixed income program so that it's limited to the 100% program, to forward that to the full Board of Supervisors with positive recommendation, and then for the other duplicated file that will contain the complete program to continue that to the call of the chair.
All right.
So let's break it up into two votes, okay? So first, let's remove the mixed from the two plans, the two files that we have that's been duplicated. Remove the mixed income program, and then I will move it forward. I personally don't want it with a positive recommendation. I'd prefer it with just to move it forward. Supervisor Wiener, can you honor that?
If
a positive.
Oh, I mean, I would prefer to move the entire program out with a positive recommendation. In deference to the author, I'll agree to moving out the 100% only, so that the conversation can continue around mixed income. I would prefer to move the 100% program out with a positive recommendation. That's my preference. If I'm in a minority, I'm in a minority.
That's fine. That's your preference. I just want to let you know that I don't support moving out with a positive recommendation. So let's do a roll call vote. The first motion will be to remove with the mixed income.
We can do that without objection.
What?
We can remove the mixed income without objection.
All right. That's what I'm going to do.
Remove and recommend. Okay.
Remove and recommend. But the thing is I'm sorry.
Why don't I make one?
We can remove the mixed income portion in the duplicated file, and we can send it forward the 100% only with no recommendation as the chair is proposing. I think that gets us to the conversation that we all want to have on the 21st at the full board.
All right. And that is without objection.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I would prefer to send that with positive recommendation. I'm clearly in the minority here. So for the motion to limit it, the one version to 100%, to put it out with no recommendation, I'll support that motion.
All right, Madam Clerk, did you get all that?
And then we have to continue to the call of the chair, the other.
Okay.
All right, so that motion passes, and that motion is unanimous. All right, thank you. Now, the second portion of that we need to do is I need to take a motion. I need a motion.
I would make a motion to send the general plan amendment to the full board with a recommendation of do not pass.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote on that.
Okay. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is on the
general plan?
No, on the general plan amendment, no.
No, okay. Supervisor Wiener, no. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, Supervisor Cohen, no. You have 1 aye, 2 noes with Supervisor Wiener and yourself dissenting.
All right, motion fails. Thank you. Are there any other motions?
So on the general plan?
Moves forward.
No, it's still sitting before us.
It does not move forward. It just it did not
So
pass.
It did not pass.
So, Mr. Wiener.
So we can either put it out of committee or we can table it, right?
Table it.
I would make a motion no, we're not going to table. I'll make a motion to send to the full board without recommendation.
Okay, roll call vote.
Okay.
I would.
Motion made.
So I would. Okay, I would prefer that we table this.
Thank you. Okay, let's do a roll call vote.
And just before discussion on that, That just means it gets pulled from committee tomorrow pursuant to 3.37 of the board rules. So if you want to waste another piece of paper, we can do that.
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote. Supervisor Peskin.
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Weiner.
No.
Weiner, no. Supervisor Cohen.
Yes.
Cohen, yes. 1 aye, 2 no. So Supervisor Peskin and Supervisor Weiner dissenting.
All right. Thank you. Motion passes.
No, it fails.
No.
I'll make a motion. I'd like to move that we forward item 5. That's the general plan amendment.
Yes.
5, that we move item 5 to the full board with a positive recommendation.
All right. Roll call vote.
Roll call. Supervisor Peskin.
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Weiner.
Aye.
Supervisor Weiner, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Yes.
Cohen, aye. You have 2 ayes and 1 no. Supervisor Peskin dissenting.
All right. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that exercise in democracy, courtesy of your Board of Supervisors. All right, yes.
Before you finish up, I believe you still have the duplicated version of the ordinance.
I make a motion to continue that to the call of the chair.
All right, and that motion passes unanimously without objection. Okay, thank you, Mr. Deputy City Attorney. Madam Clerk, is there anything else?
There is no further business.
All right, thank you so much.